Welcome back to the Leadership Blueprint Growth Podcast. Today's guest is Becca Pierce, a former healthcare CEO turned executive coach, best-selling author, and keynote speaker. After leading at the highest level of corporate healthcare, a public failure, and a life-altering brain tumor forced her to rethink everything she believed about success, leadership, and worth. Today, she helps high-achieving leaders stop chasing validation through achievement and start leading with clarity, alignment, and intention. This is a powerful conversation. Everyone, please welcome Becca Pierce. Becca, you've spent years operating at the highest executive levels in health insurance and healthcare leadership. At what stage of your career did you personally define your success?
So it's interesting because I think the question is when I was in that space where I was achieving, I actually didn't think I was a success. I remember thinking to myself at one point in my career, I'm going to buy myself a Mont Blanc pen when I make it, right? I've never made it. So I was always in this stage where I was moving the goalposts on myself, which I think happens to a lot of people who are high achievers. You just keep changing the goalpost on yourself.
You do. And what would you say to someone to, I guess, create that happiness in that moment of achieving? Because that reminds me of a lot of myself. What you're describing is I'm never satisfied. I feel like I always want more, and enough will never be enough. And obviously, I'm sure there's some underlying reasons behind that, but I know that's who I am.
Yeah. And I think what has changed now that I'm an executive coach and the way that I think about this now and when I work with my clients is when's the last time you actually defined for yourself, Jordan, your own definition of success? When's the last time you wrote it down and actually had something to be striving towards? Because I think in our society, we are driven down this path of bigger, better, faster, more. We look at somebody next to us and we think, okay, maybe I want that. But we never actually ask ourselves if it's what we want inside. And so I think that's where we need to kind of focus now is what is your individual definition of success? And that's what helps you get to where you want to be.
Got it. Okay. Because everyone's success is different. So for me, I would have to do some self-reflection. But even when you do create that success within your own life, wouldn't you get complacent if you weren't moving the goalpost?
No, I don't think so. I think it's interesting because I'm going to use myself for an example here. And my definition of success is to make a kick-ass living, helping the people that I want to help change their lives. And the definition of kick-ass living is a situation where 80% of the time my life works for me. There's going to be 10% of the time that work wins and 10% of the time that life wins, right? And it's going to get in the way the other way around. But 80% of the time I'm living within these confines of my life. I'm always looking to grow my business, but within those confines.
That makes a lot more sense. For me, I would always define success as a tangible thing or like a monetary value. But what you're describing is intangible. It's the way that you live life that creates the actual success. Very good insights. Thank you for that. Becca, before everything shifted for you, what were you most proud of in your executive career? And what did people on the outside assume your life looked like?
I think the thing I was most proud of, so I had been in the health insurance industry for a long time, and then I was appointed by Governor O'Malley to run the Maryland Health Benefit Exchange, which failed quite publicly, and I lost my job quite publicly. But I would still say that's actually one of my biggest achievements. I was most proud of the work that I did. When I started that job, I was the only person. There were no employees. I didn't have a desk. I didn't have an office. The legislation hadn't been defined. We didn't have an IT system. And within 2 years, I built that organization to 100 people. We had over $300 million in federal funding, like we had done. And by the time it closed in the first year, we had enrolled 300,000 previously uninsured Marylanders in health insurance. So there was a lot of success there, even though it showed up in the papers as a failure. So that was still my greatest achievement.
What did that moment do to your confidence and identity as a leader?
I was shattered. I was absolutely shattered to the point where I am air quoting this. I resigned at 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. My husband had to call me in the office at 10 o'clock and say, Beck, come home. They fired you. Like I had no idea what I was going to do if I wasn't this person. I had spent the last 2 years doing everything in my life to working. I'm not lying when I say I was working, 80 to 100 hours a week for 2 years, and I lost my identity in the middle of all of that. And so when they took that away from me, it was devastating. I really, truly lost my identity.
No, for sure. Looking back now, what leadership lesson did that failure teach you that success never could?
It's interesting because I have thought about this question several times. You're not the first person to ask me this question. And it's very simple. I learned that I needed to learn how to say no. Because had we said no earlier in the project to all of the people who were asking for things and all of the legislators who were telling me that we had to do everything because this is the way Maryland did it, and I knew that at the time that we weren't going to be able to do it, but I didn't feel like I had the capacity to say no. And had I succeeded, I would have continued to believe that we could do anything, right? So it had to be that failure to teach me that it's okay to say no.
I feel like we can say, life has plenty of failures. I really want to swap out that word and say lessons, like
Well,
becoming an entrepreneur or growing up, growing within your career. You never really fail. I mean, sure, one can you know, classify that as a failure, but I really want to say it's just a lot of lessons that I've learned, you know?
Our
And I feel like
growth.
with that mindset, I turn a failure into a lesson, which allows me to grow, you
Yeah.
know? I feel like when we put too much emphasis on the word failure, that can really hurt our ego, and depending on how strong-willed you are, we can truly let that failure ruin our lives or take our lives from us, if that makes sense. I'm pretty sure I forget this person's name, super famous chef, but I think they were going after the Michelin star. I don't think he won it, or it was either stripped away from him. And because of that failure, he ended up taking his own life, you know? So I
Oh,
really think failure has a negative connotation when it shouldn't. It's really just lessons. So
yeah,
thank you
right.
for those insights. I do want to talk about change.
Mhm.
So I know you have a framework when it comes to your theory of change or the sequencing of change. Can you please give me and the audience some insights as to what you mean exactly?
I would love to. This is the research I've been doing over the last 8 years as I've been an executive coach, and it's outlined, and I just launched a book called You Don't Have to Achieve to Be Loved, and it's outlined in that book. But if you think about change, everybody goes through the same change. And for Jordan, for you and for everybody else listening, I want you to think about any change that you've gone through, because what you're going to hear is the process that you went through. And this can be as small as a New Year's resolution. It can be as big as leaving your marriage, unfortunately, right? I mean, it can be when you are in there are 4 phases, and the first phase is called unfortunate awareness. This is when you wake up one day and you say, this isn't working for me, right? I don't insert whatever it is. I need to go to the gym. I'm gained too much weight over Christmas. Insert whatever it is, but you're in this space of unfortunate awareness. You can't unsee the fact that you're not where you want to be. You have to come to terms with some core values, some core beliefs that you have in there. There's something that got you to where you are that you're going to have to question before you can move on to the next phase. That next phase is mourning the past, where you're looking at yourself and you're saying, but wait, I kind of like the person that got me to where I was. I sort of miss, like, I have a client who said, I didn't like my ex-husband, but I liked being married, right? Mourning
Mhm.
some piece of what was in the past is phase 2. And to get through that, you really need to start reckoning with, what pieces do I want to keep? There are different parts of me. What part do I want to keep moving forward? And in the third phase, it's called one foot in, one foot out, because this is where your social and emotional ties come in. This is where the question of, what's my family going to say? Who are my friends going to be? Those all come into play at that point, and you start kind of playing back and forth with, okay, I'm worried that, and your brain's keeping you safe. So your brain kind of keeps you on the dock, but really you want to be getting in the boat and moving to something different. So it's one foot in, one foot out, because you're really questioning that emotional tie piece. And then there becomes this phase where you really have to make a decision. And usually this is actually a financial decision. Can I make this change? And once you come to terms with that, that's when you've gone through that process, you come to terms with everything. That's when you can finally come out the other side and say, yes, this is me. I'm the person who goes to the gym once a week, if we're talking about New Year's resolutions, right? Like, I'm the person who can do this. But you went through all of those stages, even if it was just figuring out how to go to the gym.
I have two follow-up questions on this topic. The first one is, in your experience, Becca, which phase is the most challenging or most difficult to move through?
Absolutely. It's the third phase, one foot in, one foot out, because of those social and emotional ties. If I make this joke with people, but if your New Year's resolution is to eat better, but on Tuesday nights you go to wing night with your friends, you got to be able to tell your friends, hey, I'm not coming to wing night, or I'm coming to wing night and I'm getting a salad. right? That's very difficult for people to do because, our biggest need in life is to belong. And
Mm.
so you've got to figure out where that new belonging place is before you can move through it.
Absolutely. And to bring up that example of having wing night on Tuesday, our mind works in associations. So
Mhm.
even if we tell ourselves, I'm going to go there with my friends, I'm going to eat a salad, but because we have so many memories, and again, these associations of on Tuesday nights, when I go to the wing place, I'm with my friends, I eat wings. Like this is what I do.
Right,
So
right.
trying to create that massive change, it's almost as if you have this internal conflict between the person you want to be and the person who you are
Yes,
trying to get,
you have
trying to
absolutely nailed it. You're right. Yes.
with and again with your experience, how quickly can someone go through these phases? Or is that my kind of like subjective on the
Yeah,
person?
I mean, this is gonna be an it depends. It truly depends on how big that change is and how much you're hanging on to. Like, I find that some people they come to me and they already know, right? They've already decided, they already know it's time to change, and the more you know and the more you're already into it, the faster it goes, but the more you're hanging on to the old you and the old relationships and the old associations, the longer it takes.
What do you have any pointers, tips, tricks to let go quicker? Because I feel like in my life, to get really personal, I was an elite level baseball player, injured myself, fell into a depression, became an alcoholic. Long story
Oh,
short, it was really hard for me to essentially let go of that identity. It's like I
yeah.
trained for 15 years doing this one thing. This is what I do. I play
Mhm.
baseball. I know this happens with a lot of athletes out there. They play sports, lose their identity, whatever. But for me, it took a long time to let go and to reconstruct and rebuild who I really was on this lovely earth, you know? So I guess
Mhm.
what advice can you give to my younger self or to anyone out there listening that is struggling to let go of maybe their past identity or just let go of anything?
So I actually have a blog on this. It's called How to Recover from an Ego Blow. And
I needed that.
there's one phase in there that I think is really interesting. And it's believe what other people see in you, not what you see in yourself.
That's really good.
Because we are so bad at actually understanding ourselves and what we bring to the world.
It's almost as if we have this lack of self-compassion for ourselves. It's like, yeah, I can see the good in other people, but me?
Yeah.
I'm not gonna see the good in me. It's so difficult for I feel like all humans struggle with this, unless you're like a narcissist and like extremely egotistical. But most people aren't that, you know?
Right.
I know that you had a brain tumor in
Mhm.
2015. How did that diagnosis change the way you viewed ambition, control, and pushing through?
So I used to believe that if you just tried harder, it would work. If you just powered through, like just more energy, more effort was going to fix it. But the truth is, so after my brain surgery, my face was paralyzed for a year. There was nothing I could do. I couldn't exercise more. There was nothing that was going to force my nerve to grow back faster. And so what that did is that taught me that I really have no control. Your body, there are times that your body just absolutely takes over and takes control. And sometimes you need to let it go. And so this belief that I had had for so long that if you just try harder and push harder, that you'll get to where you want to be was shattered again. And I had to relearn that.
Out of curiosity, did you pick up any like meditation or any mindfulness practices during that recovery phase of your face being paralyzed?
That's a great question. And the answer is actually no.
No, that's okay. I'm just curious.
I think it really just became and maybe it was in a certain way, it wasn't a formal practice, but it was really just this kind of, "Hey, Becca," like, reminder, there's nothing you can do, that I
Yeah,
had to remind myself.
no, for sure. Got it. And you said you expected to bounce back and return to the CEO path, but something stopped you. What was the internal conversation happening at that moment?
Yeah, this is probably the biggest turning point post-surgery. So I was a vice president within a hospital system when I was diagnosed, and I was sure I was gonna go back, and so after surgery, I had to prove to myself that I could do the job again, and so I went back to work and I still had major disabilities. Just a funny one is I couldn't say my B's and my P's, and my name is Becca Pierce. So there was a lot of discussion very kindly about whether or not I was going to get speech therapy and whether or not I could keep up in meetings and things like that. And so it took me a long time to get to the point where I could do the job again. And right about the time that I figured that out, I looked in the mirror one day and I was like, I did it. And I was like, why? All I want to do is put my daughter on the bus one more, because God forbid I wake up tomorrow and find out that this thing has grown back and I can't put her on the bus. I'm going to regret every day that I chose to choose an 8 o'clock meeting over 8:45 drop off. That was the moment that I just shifted everything. And that's when I knew my old definition of success was kaput.
I got the chills when you said that because I find myself giving up and letting go of family activities, of just life to work.
Mhm.
And I went down a pretty bad mental spiral sometime last year. Not going to get into the details here, but it was a reality check. We as Americans love to work. It is engraved, embedded in our culture. If you, if you work in corporate, you work 50, 60 hours a week, family is on the back burner. And I want to question, why do we do this? You know, like that's a whole different conversation for a different podcast. But I'm glad that you had that realization. I'm also glad that I went through what I went through to take a step back and realize what's actually important in my own life.
Right.
So
Yeah.
thank you for that insight. You made the realization that you didn't want to be in charge anymore. Now, for leaders listening out there, how do you distinguish between leading and being in control?
I feel like there is definitely a difference. Like, you can be in control, but you're not leading people when you are in control. Let me give you a quick example. So I have a business owner client who had felt like she needed to be in such control of her business that she read every single email that went out of her company. And I was like, oh my God, you do what?
Yeah.
And I mean, that's control. That is not leadership in any way, shape, or form, right? Leadership shows up in you actually allowing other people to do things. Scariest thing ever, true leadership, letting somebody make a mistake. That's what leadership is. Very different from control. In control shows up as I've got to do everything. You become the bottleneck, right? And so everything's got to go through you. That's control. Leadership is allowing other people to do what they need to do, stepping away so that they can learn and letting them, if they need to, make a mistake.
It's interesting because we brought up, letting go. And I feel like that in a way, leadership is letting go, you know? So that's just interesting how I found the correlation there. Becca, in your experience, what is the hidden cost leaders pay when success comes at the expense of alignment?
I think when leaders get so caught up and the cost of alignment is what we just talked about, right? Are you living within your core values? If your drive for achievement is so strong that you're missing out on your core values, I do talk to business owners because a lot of business owners will say, family's a core value. I'm like, really? And how come you missed the soccer game the other day? Like, what
Mm,
does that look like for you? Right? That's the cost for a lot of people, is what we just talked about, that life passing you by.
got you. What ultimately convinced you that coaching, not another executive role, was the right next chapter for you?
I have a friend of mine who had said to me, even when I was in my corporate position, she said, you'd be a really good coach. And I said, why? She's like, because you tell it like it is and people listen to you when you talk. And so when I decided that I no longer wanted to be in charge anymore, I didn't want to do this. I didn't want the stress. I used to thrive off the stress. And then I was like, this is doing nothing for me. It's taking away from the things that are important to me, as a matter of fact. And so, like, it's just not important anymore. I look back on my career and I said, I was often the only woman in the boardroom. I've been promoted through corporate America. I have this ability now to see both sides. I see the side where emotion matters and where life is more important than what you're doing. But I get where you're coming from. Let's meld those two together.
Absolutely. Now, when you founded your coaching and consulting company, what leadership gap did you feel wasn't being addressed by traditional executive development?
I think, I'm thinking missing more training. I think corporate training, management training does a good job, and leadership training does a good job of just this kind of, here's what you're supposed to do. But what coaching addresses is that gap between the two. Just telling somebody to do it isn't going to help them actually do it. What coaching addresses is those adaptive changes that you're afraid to make, that are getting in your way of making those changes. And that's why coaching works, especially for that upper echelon.
Gotcha. You often work with high achievers who have done everything right but still feel unsettled. What are the most common signals that someone has outgrown their current definition of success?
Shoulding themselves. I find a lot of people
Shunning?
shoulding themselves, SHOULD.
Ah.
There are a lot of people out there who say to themselves, "Oh, this doesn't feel right. I have all of this and I should be happier." Right? I should think this is it, right? Here I am with my white picket fence. I should love this.
Mm,
When you're shooting yourself, you're also kind of diminishing what your feelings are, but it's a sign that you are not living what you wanted to be living. So your definition has changed.
okay, I have a question that I did not prepare for, but speaking with you, it surfaced in my awareness. Becca, we are overachievers. Okay. We love to work, at least previously. We
Mhm.
love to work. We like thriving under stress. And I think part of that, like you said, I want to prove this to myself that I can come back into corporate and become a CEO. Personally, I feel like there is something internally that is driving us. And when I say us, I mean all of the really high achievers in the world like Elon Musk as an example, that we are proving things not to ourselves, but in the back of our mind, we are trying to prove things to other people. The question I want to propose to you is do you think that if we didn't have this internal fire or the need to prove something to someone, whoever that might be in our own world, that we wouldn't be as developed as we are as a country? Because Elon says like he's sending people to freaking outer space. He has his companies, whatever, whatever, and it's not enough. He's never satisfied. He works 16 hours a day. I read his autobiography recently. Like that man's a freaking maniac. But at the same time, like, is it a good thing that he's this way for humanity? But for himself, it's like it's almost a little saddening. You know? Just what are your thoughts and question or insights on that?
Yeah, I think that that's a really interesting concept and a really interesting question. I remember growing up at one point thinking, well, the French only work 36 hours a week. They must be behind us, right? And so thinking that, right, America's a great country because we're overachievers. Is that true? I don't know if that's necessarily true. Is it AI better for the world? I don't know if that's true. So it's good for innovation potentially, right? If you've got these really big innovators kind of thinking and have this internal drive, but is it an internal drive for themselves or is it an internal drive to look good? That's an interesting question.
Right, right. And not to get all philosophical on the audience or even you, Becca, but it's just something that came to my mind as you were talking. And honestly, it's something that I've reflected about probably for the past couple of weeks now. Yeah, you did bring up your book earlier. It's titled You Don't Have to Achieve to Be Loved. What was the personal belief you had to unlearn before you can write that book?
Before I could write the book, I had to unlearn the belief that I didn't have anything to say. I had a belief for a long time that nobody would listen to what I had to say, that it wasn't worth putting out there. That until about 3 or 4 years ago, I ignored when everybody said, You have a story to tell. You should write a book." About 3 or 4 years ago, it started to sink in when somebody said to me, "No, you need to understand, I changed my life because of what you said on that stage. Because you could do it, I could do it." And that's when I said, "Oh, I have something to share." That's what I had to unlearn.
That's probably the biggest compliment anyone could give
Oh,
anyone. I changed my life because of you. I value you. That's so cool. That's so cool. So how does tying self-worth to achievement quietly show up in leadership behavior, decision making, and team dynamics?
yeah, this is an interesting dynamic that does show up when people are so tied to achievement. There is it kind of goes back to that control thing a little bit. The more you want to achieve and you feel like you need to achieve, the more you feel like you need to be in control of the situation. So, leaders who are really focused on achievement over people, first of all, they lose people pretty quickly. They burn them out pretty quickly because they're only focused on the work, the work, the work, and what have you done for me lately? And so they tend to step on people to get to where they need to be. And it just is a feeling of that leader doesn't care about me. They only care about my output. And so that team dynamic dissipates, or what's the word I'm looking for? goes downhill very quickly.
That's so interesting because before I had that dictator, authoritative mindset, and
Mhm.
after starting the podcast, I realized that I'm a complete horrible leader without being, too explicit on the podcast. That I'm like, no, this needs to get done. We have to do it right now. I don't care that your mom is sick or whatever the case is. Like, this needs to get done. And I realized that my team would despise me. They're like, yeah, like, cool. I like working for you. The pay's cool, but like, F you. Like, you don't care about me at all. I'm just another number in the system.
Right,
And it was so interesting. Once I actually, sure, showed compassion, showed empathy, like actually looked at them as human beings, their throughput was like skyrocketing. Like
right?
they actually did way, way more for the company. I'm like, why was I an asshole before? No? My little side rant on that.
You had to learn somehow.
Right, absolutely. And I always learn the hardest way, I feel like. When a leader comes to you feeling stuck or exhausted, what's the first thing you don't try to fix? You do not try to fix, and why?
What I don't try and fix is what got you here. What I don't try and fix is it's okay. That served you. We are not going to go into history, and we're not going to demonize that person just like you. We're not going to demonize what you used to do. We're going to focus on moving forward, what you learn, what it is that you want to be changing, and focusing on what you already have in place that's going to get you there. But
Gotcha.
the biggest thing is do not demonize who you were. That got you to where you were at that point, and that's okay. And everybody has something to learn. So that's the focus, is always moving forward.
That's a good answer, actually. What does intentional leadership actually look like in the day to day, especially for executives running fast moving organizations?
Intentional leadership is being very clear about your people, in my mind, about which people thrive in which environment, and being very clear about how to bring them along. And so intentional leadership, in my mind, yes, you're moving very quickly, but your job is to no longer do the work. Your job is to create the environment where other people do the work. And your job is to figure out exactly what motivates each one of those people, and being intentional about how you're communicating with them. And it's going to be different for each person, how you're communicating, what they're receiving from you, and how you're hearing them. That's the intentional piece for each individual person.
Oh, man, I feel like it might be extremely difficult for someone to give up that much control. Like you said, your role now is to create a positive high performing culture, but more so a safe culture,
Mhm.
opposed to you doing all the work. Like I just imagine someone who's a super high achiever that loves to be in control. I find that to be extremely difficult for them to do that.
It is. I actually have one former client who was a carpenter and then raised all the way through the ranks in a construction company, and mid-sized to large construction company. He was now the CEO. And we used to joke that he still had his carpenter belt on. I'm like, what are you doing? You still have your carpenter belt on. And the epiphany day was when he called me up and he said, Becca, I just made $100,000 decision instead of the $800 decisions I could have been making if I still had my belt on. Like it's really that, like, understanding that your role is just different now, right? You're promoting yourself up the ranks to be looking at different things.
I wonder if part of you, part of anyone listening, kind of misses having the carpenter belt on when it's say.
They absolutely do. If you think about why people go into business, they go into business to do whatever it is they are supposed to do, to be a baker, to be a lawyer. They don't go into business to do the business behind the business.
True.
And so
True.
So as you grow, ultimately, you're going to have to move out of that space. And so I work with a lot of people to help them understand what is the one piece of your business that's still going to feed you the way doing that did, right?
Mm.
You're not doing that function anymore, but there's something in your business that feeds you that same way. How do we keep that in your business?
Oh man, that's vitally important, and I definitely will make mental note of that as the business grows. That I think that's really really important because if every day you're doing super high level executive things and you never do what fuels your fire, so to say, you never do any of the activities that got you to the point where you're at now. It's a little not disheartening, but it makes you lose the fire. What to say?
Yeah,
Lose motivation.
absolutely.
Becca, you help leaders move from successful on paper to actually being fulfilled in reality. What does that transition require that most people underestimate?
There are many things, but one of the things that I think is really important for people to recognize is there is going back to the change model, there is a mental shift from who you used to be, this driver, this achiever, all of those things, to who you want to be, and creating this space where it's okay. Your new definition of success has nothing to do with what you achieved, and it has to do with your life. It's that shift that we work with that takes the longest, and what we're so focused on.
What is the process of going through that? Is it the process of change that you mentioned, or is it a different process?
It is the change process, and we spend a lot of time. So when I coach with people, because I am a former a CEO, half of the time we are focused on, what is the bottom line? Like, we're talking business, right? We're talking like we're going to get down in the dirt and nitty gritty. But the other half is truly that emotion thing, because people make emotional decisions. And we really need to dig into that identity piece, and potentially the fear of losing the identity that you used to have. That's the toughest hurdle to get over until you figure out what you're going to. Because people are really bad at knowing what they want and what they're going to. And so we spend a lot of time on that.
Repeat that last part?
So, oh no, I had a sentence before it. People are really good at knowing what they don't want, but people are not very good at understanding what they do want and who they
That
do
is
want to be.
so true. I find that to be extremely applicable in my own life. So yes, that's why I'm smiling ear to ear right here. Now, Becca, for a leader listening right now who feels that inner nudge for change, but is afraid to disrupt what they've previously built, what would you want them to hear? What is some advice you would give them?
The most important thing is it's okay to want something new. For many people, especially high achievers or business owners, or, you spent a long time building what you have. And so there is this idea that I don't know what else I would do. I need the money that I need. I don't know, all of these things that are holding you back. So you're feeling some nudge, but you're afraid to actually make a change. And part of that is your brain trying to keep you safe. So it's important to recognize that it's okay. You're allowed to want something new. That singular tiny shift allows your brain to open up and start thinking about what the possibilities are. But until you give yourself that space to accept that, you're stuck.
Got you. Got you. Thank you so much for all the insights that you provided today. Becca, do you have any closing notes or anything that you would like to close with? Or where can the people find you?
So the easiest way to find me is at morebeccapearce.com, and Pierce is Pear, not Piерce. If you go to Pierce, there's nothing there. So morebeccapearce.com, and there you can find all the information about my speaking, about my coaching, and you can find my book there. For those of you who really want to just figure out how to dip your toe in the water, that's where you can get the book. And there's some resources on there too for people to kind of figure out. And one of them is called Are You in the Right Job? Right? Really kind of helping you start to assess that process. Like, what a lot of people know something's off. These resources help you figure out what's off.
I'm just out of curiosity, I actually might take that test to see kind of where I fall on that, you know? Becca, it was a pleasure having you. Thanks for all the insights again. Audience, for you guys tuning in. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk to you guys soon. Bye.